Hi, I'm the Glittery Rebbitzin, and this is Drag Torah! Yay! So why drag? Well, drag is an art form that challenges assumptions about gender norms. The over-the-top nature of drag performance brings us to question what it means to actually be female or male or anything, right? So we're looking at this, and obviously I didn't wake up like this, spoiler alert. In problematizing gender norms, drag performance heals the world. Honestly, I think that drag performance is holy work. It does a lot of amazing things, and also it's beautiful, it's entertaining, it's aesthetically very pleasing. It's pleasing because it pokes at things, and because it's glamorous and amazing and weird and interesting and wonderful. So that's why drag. But why Torah? Well, Judaism is an important part of my identity. I'm Jewish. I derive a lot of value from engaging in my religion and my culture. And I think our traditions have a lot to teach us, even in the contemporary world that we live in. However, the Torah can be really patriarchal, and I think it's important to engage in discussions and wrestle with these problematic parts of the Torah rather than just throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I especially think that it's important. I think, it repairs the world to engage in Torah, to wrestle with Torah, especially from an explicitly feminist perspective. I want to center women's experiences, and I want to queer the Torah. I want to play with this. I want to engage with this. I think it's a wonderful thing, and this is how I talk to God. And there we are. It's holy work. So let's get started. So, Bereshit, let's get started. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. But I'm just kidding. I'm actually not that good at learning Torah. I actually had that memorized from a really, really long time ago. I'm going to be looking at Bereshit today because it's the beginning. Happy New Year. Happy new everything. And I'm going to be looking at it from a feminist lens. And I give it on the how sexist is it scale. 1 being not very sexist, 10 being, oh my God, this is terrible. I'm going to give this a 4. Looking at the grand scheme of things, it's not perfect, but not a lot of the Torah is perfect, interestingly enough. So especially when we're looking at it from a feminist lens. So I'm going to say it's a 4 because I have seen way more sexist things, many more sexist things. The plus things, right? We're looking at Bereshit and God creating male and female. We have 2 accounts of this, right? The first thing is God created a person. God created that, both male and female, God created them. So there's an interesting back and forth between singular and plural. It's important to look at these things. And then there's another account of God creating humans at first, because God created Adam, right? The first blood, hey, note the color scheme here for people who are into Hebrew. But yeah, so God creates Adam, and then Adam is lonely, and Adam said, God sees that Adam is lonely, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna make a helpmeet. So women from the get-go in that version of creating people are at a disadvantage, shall we say? So that's a negative point in this whole scheme. However, the idea that God creating humanity in God's image, this leads to a lot of wonderful things. We can think in terms of, God created me and so I'm not flawed. God created me and so, looking at people who are queer and that's just how they're born. Looking at Lady Gaga and looking at a whole bunch of other people out there who are saying, we're born this way and that's how it is. So they can point to Bereshit. They can look at that at the very, very beginning of the Torah and say there's scriptural reasons for this. So that's important. Also, Eve is a person. Eve is a character in there, right? So Eve has a sense of, all right, so she's curious and she eats from the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and then they get kicked out of the Garden of Eden. So that, that's not necessarily the best, but it's also not the worst. We don't have another nameless female. The Torah is full of nameless wives and daughters and sisters. Eve is not one of them. Eve is actually sort of in there a little bit, and she has a role and she does certain things. So that's sort of in the positive. Also, I'm going to say there's no overt sexual assault in this parsha, which is not really a high bar, but looking at the how sexist is it scale, there's a lot of bad stuff when we look in the Torah. So there's that. And as far as the negative stuff, I'm going to say that the helpmeet thing is pretty negative. That's why it's not like a 0 on the how sexist is it scale. And, Eve eats from the apple. So we're looking at like when people are looking at the origin of sin, if that's part of their way of understanding God and the universe and their religion, then this is something where they can point to women being the origin of sin, which that's not a 0 on the how sexist is it scale. It's also questionably anti-trans if we're looking at it from the sense that there's 2 genders. That's how you're created, the end of the story. So it's not really perfect. However, there is further reading here. You can look and you can really delve deep, and I recommend looking into Torah Queries, which is an amazing book. But Torah Queries talks about how this isn't totally problematic because, God in creating androgyny as the first being, the first mention that we have is not the one where Eve is a helpmeet. It's the one where God creates multiple genders. And then also looking at Isaiah and the explanation in Torah, having their rabbis talk about many, many categories of gender. There's one category explicitly for wives who are infertile. There's another category explicitly for people who don't have testicles any longer or who have never had them and it seems like they should have or something. So it's really interesting how this all works out. So there you have it, your drag Torah for this week. It gets a 4 out of 10 on the how sexist is it scale. Bereshit.